Hello, this is Gareth from AIM, Director of Product Integrity, and this short video is designed to give an overview of the Synoptic assessment strategy that we have applied to our Level 3 qualifications in Games, Animation and VFX Skills. And it's designed to help you understand the methodology we have used, what you can and can't change or contextualize at centres, the way in which you're supposed to approach marking, and most importantly, some more description around the use of the Synoptic Project. And it will conclude with talking about the other activities that we're going to put in place to support centres across the year. Now, importantly, it's worth bearing in mind that these are tech level qualifications, which means they must meet set requirements from the Department for Education. And indeed, we had to submit these qualifications for their approval before we were able to offer them. This enables them to become part of the performance tables, and we're hoping it is something that will help protect their funding future as the DFE move through their reviews of that. So, the DFE's criteria look like this, set in November 17 for those qualifications on performance tables from 2020. It's worth noting that the guidance changed, so qualifications pre-2020 were following different and less rigid guidance. Particularly, they require that tech level requirements have some synoptic assessment. They don't quantify how much synoptic assessment there is, but they do say it must be part of it. The definition that they have applied is written here: a form of assessment which requires a candidate to demonstrate that she or he can identify and use effectively in an integrated way an appropriate selection of skills, techniques, concepts, theories and knowledge from across the whole vocational area which are relevant to a key task. So what we have done with that is two things. We have made, in the second year of the extended diploma, we have implemented a Synoptic Project, and that Synoptic Project requires learners to draw on pretty much anything they can from across the 2 years of the qualification, from across those learning materials that they have gone through and the experiences they've undertaken. But we have also applied a generalized holistic assessment approach across the whole qualification. So I'm going to describe both of those as we go through this video. Therefore, our approach to this is that, in a sense, the whole qualification is assessed in a synoptic manner. So this table here from the qualification handbook shows the mandatory units, or components as we call them, that are part of the qualification. And it's worth noting the thing at the bottom which says, due to the holistic nature of the assessment for the qualification, component certification is not available. Now, this is because our fundamental approach here is to consider that the components or units are basically a guide to what will be taught. They are the teaching and learning syllabus, they are the indicative content for the assessments, but more than anything, this is what the industry has said learners taking these qualifications need to be able to understand or apply. That said, we didn't really think that the best way to assess these things was in isolation. And so whilst there are some more traditional exams as part of the qualification, in the main, where the assessment takes place, it is combining skills or knowledge or both from more than one of the components into that assessment. So you need to kind of forget previous experiences with other qualifications where assessment is very much tied to learning outcomes within a unit. So it would be quite normal with some qualifications, including many of AIM qualifications, to have two assignments just to assess the learning outcomes for one component. And then that way you can in fact get component or credit achievement if it's a credit-based qualification for that unit. We haven't built that into this design. We decided it would be better to consider the assessments themselves as separate to the teaching and learning, which is the components. To that end, at the very end of the qualification handbook, we have showed you how the assessments map to the components. So in most cases, you will see that the components are covered by more than one assessment. Core Principles of Game Design, for example, is covered by the Core Principles exam and evidenced in the portfolio. Art Fundamentals for the Games, Animation and VFX industry is the portfolio and the written assignment. Okay, and the same in year 2. There's some more of year 1 there, year 2. So the full mapping is at the back of the handbook. It is the last 3 pages, with the exception of the back page cover sheet. So what I would say is you don't need to worry that things are or are not covered. We have explicitly mapped where things are covered, and so all you have to worry about is what is on the assignment briefs that we have provided to you and that you must use. I'll be going through the Synoptic Project one later, but you can see here at the top that it explains that this project, this assignment brief, covers, as a minimum in this case, those 4 components. And later you'll see the mapping to those within that brief as well. So we've put that in 2 places. Okay, so if I move forward to the assessment section of the handbook, you will see here the assessments. So what we have done is followed, in fact improved on, the DFE's minimum requirements of the amount of qualification that must be externally assessed. So the DFA state that for a tech level qualification, a minimum of 30% of the qualification has to be externally assessed. We have actually done 40% through 2 externally assessed exams for this qualification. That was basically to ensure that we did in fact meet and supersede their requirements, because we had seen guidance that suggested 30% really was a minimum. So there are quite a number of components, as we've seen in the previous table, but across the qualification there are only 6 assignments. There are 3 in year 1 of the extended diploma, or 3 for the diploma in total, and 3 in the second year of the extended diploma. And as you can see, they contribute to the qualification grade in these ways. The Core Principles exam, 20%, externally marked; the portfolio, 20%, internally marked; the written assignment, art, theory and context, 10%, and on we go. And essentially the methodology here is that in each of the 2 years there is something that tests knowledge in a great way, in this case the Core Principles exam in year 1, something that tests skills, which in year 1 is the portfolio, and in year 2 is the Synoptic Project, and something that pushes towards some study skills, because it is generally assumed, because that's what industry wanted, that people who complete this qualification will go on to university, and therefore we felt it really important that they do get some study skill time in here. So there are 2 essay type assessments built into the qualification, although you'll note they have the lowest contribution towards the qualification grade. So we've got knowledge, skills and study skills in each year. Okay. So the assessment tasks cover a range of standards from the handbooks, from the components, and it's mapped as I've said there. It is mandatory that learner work is marked and graded against the tasks using our mark sheets. If our external verifiers come in and discover that you have in fact developed or used your own assignment briefs and come up with your own grading criteria, they will not be able to sign off the learner work, because it's part of the design principles is that you use our grading criteria, because they aren't necessarily directly linked to each standard. Again, it's a holistic and synoptic assessment methodology, and all of these assessments were also part of the submission to the Department for Education for its approval as a tech level on a performance table. So it is a fundamental requirement to use those. However, we have built contextualization into the internally set briefs, in fact 3 of the 4. So the asset development portfolio, it does have some indicative tasks that you may choose to use, but you are allowed to use your own or employer set, which is our preference, tasks to cover those standards and the mark scheme that's issued as part of that assignment brief, and the brief clearly goes through that. The written assignment in the first year, you're allowed to modify or contextualize the essay title, setting that to suit the nature of your learners, the projects you may be working on, again, employer briefs, etc. In the second year of the extended diploma, the research project is fundamentally something that teachers will agree with the learner, so they will each set their research topic. So you'll see that whilst we have set the assessments across the qualification, we have built in the ability for you to amend them to suit or contextualize them. But that is clearly set out what you can and can't do on the assignment briefs. And if you do have any questions, then you must get in touch about that. So We talked about the nature of the assessment across most of the qualification, but the Synoptic Project is the one that's perhaps the most confusing. So this is copied directly from the assignment brief. It says the purpose of the Synoptic Project is to enable the assessment of learning across the components of the qualification and to provide the opportunity for learners to demonstrate the skills and knowledge that employers from the games, animation and VFX industries have identified as common to them all. The Synoptic Project also reflects the shared teaching, learning and assessment methodology principle of working to industry briefs, which is a core principle in the design of the qualification. So what we're saying here is this project is something that will allow learners to work to a client brief, whether ours that we issue or yours that you get from a local or a national employer that you have links with that we approve before it has to start in November. And in meeting that brief, we are fully expecting learners to draw on a range of the knowledge and skills that they have learnt that are present in the components, therefore, from across the whole qualification. Now, the way that's presented might be quite confusing, so I will go through that again by looking at the brief. But basically, the Synoptic Project must, as a minimum, cover the standards as identified on the assignment brief. So there are some standards across 4 of the components that must be assessed by the Synoptic Project, and that's because they're not necessarily assessed elsewhere within the assessments of the qualification. And as I've already stated, the Synoptic Project will require learners to use some skills and knowledge that has been learned across the rest of the qualification. So we have included a record of achievement, which is a tick document that has every single component standard from the qualification on it. And that's for learners to recognise the skills and knowledge that they have demonstrated in reacting to this client brief, this employer brief, to achieve the Synoptic Project. But there is absolutely no requirement for them to cover them all. It's just to recognise that they have in fact managed to use this skill or this bit of knowledge and embed that into this Synoptic Project. And it kind of helps show them the holistic nature of the work and the fact that they have actually been able to use the technical skills perhaps and the knowledge from earlier in the qualification towards completing this end project. It's not appropriate, though, to recognise or mark within the Synoptic Project any skills or knowledge that they've gained outside of the project. So, for example, the Synoptic Project is reacting to a local employer brief that you've got, but actually learner number 1, or Fred as I'll call him, has also been doing some stuff of his own for another employer that you might have had some work experience with. That can't be marked as part of the Synoptic Project. It's got to be all within the one client brief. But as I've stated already, there is no requirement for the learners to cover all of the skills and knowledge from the qualification. And indeed, they've all been assessed anyway. So it's not like we're assessing them twice. This is simply just to recognise that they have in fact drawn on them. And where we do, or what we do assess in the Synoptic Project, is their use of the technical skills. So let's have a look at the brief. There we go. So as a minimum, it does test or must test some components, some of the standards from 4 components: images and sounds for Magic Worlds, production management for games, animation and VFX industries, story and playboarding, and working in the games, animation and VFX industries. So I'm going to scroll right here to show you that on this page we have identified, or these pages, those standards that must be covered as a minimum. And as it says here, they've got to do some project planning and management to react to this employer brief. And as a minimum, learners must provide evidence of how they've planned and managed the project, demonstrating these skills and knowledge. So there has to be some evidence of that. We've given some indicative evidence there. There's a load more that I'm sure would be appropriate, and we can look to improve on that suggested evidence as we complete the first year of this extended diploma. The second year of this extended diploma. But it's there to give you a start. But as we've said here, additionally, learners must identify any other knowledge and skills they've used in responding to the brief on the record of achievement. So in their project planning and management, if they have in fact drawn on their knowledge about, I don't know, the concepts of high to low polygon workflows. That's probably a terrible example, and you can see that I'm not a games tutor. But my point is, they just tick there. Oh, I've actually done that. Their response to the brief. Learners must produce ideas for the product or products in response to the brief, and as a minimum they must create and present story or playboards of their ideas demonstrating the following. So again, they have to cover those two components, those two standards, from that one component. But again, they might, in responding to the brief, use other knowledge and skills from elsewhere in the qualification, and again, they would tick that on the record of achievement. It's really this one, the realization of ideas, where we expect learners to be really identifying on that tick sheet technical skills and knowledge that they have used in creating the product or in responding to the brief. So the only one here that must be covered is be able to use traditional techniques and digital processes to produce art with accompanying sound for imagining world concept. So this is the only place where we're assessing that for definite. But we fully expect that in realizing the idea, learners might work within a brief to ensure models fit within a wider project. That one, they might demonstrate skills in drawing. They might design and produce an animation sequence. It all depends on the brief, of course, which is why we've left this so open. But we really think it would just be a good recognition of the skills and knowledge they've drawn on from earlier in the qualification when they tick this sheet. So when it comes to, this is the way my online system shows this. These are ticks. We have ticked these already. So these are the things that must be evidenced in their responses to the client brief. And of course, when we approve the client brief, that's something we're going to be looking for to ensure they, as a minimum, can cover these things. So when it comes to marking the Synoptic project, you kind of don't look at that sheet above. That's just as a record, really. What you look at is these criteria here, the same as all of our mark sheets, which set out what they must do to achieve a pass, a merit, or a distinction against each of these areas. So you might think that's a bit making the kind of ticking of other things redundant. But really, again, what we're saying here is one of the things we're marking them against is their use of technical and creative skills. And it's in here, those, as I said before, those technical and creative skills are probably the things that they will have ticked above in that record of achievement, because they're the things that they will have learned earlier in the qualification that will have enabled them, in fact, to respond to this brief. And in the same way, they're being marked on their ability to bring together knowledge and skills. So we're even actually grading them on their ability to be synoptic, if we go back to that DFA definition, demonstrating they can identify and use effectively in an integrated way an appropriate selection of skills which are relevant to a task. So we're even marking them on their ability to bring all that together. So I hope that makes some more sense of the Synoptic project, and here's just a little example of what we imagine a completed record of achievement to look like. Here you can see, because I've printed it, that those are in fact the ticks that we have put on there as mandatory, and here I have shown that a learner might just tick some of the other ones to say, actually, in completing this project, these are some of the skills and some of the knowledge that I have been able to evidence. So this brings me to the end of this video piece. I'm just going to talk about some of the other support things that we're going to do. So we're going to put on a calendar, we'll be putting out really a calendar of interactions this year that includes standardization, where we can get you all together, if you can attend, to talk about how you've approached these assessments and how you're finding marking it and so on and so forth. For the externally marked exams, we'll be providing principal examiner reports, and in fact the one for our Core Principles Year 1 exam will be due before the end of September. We will be attending the Next Gen provider meetings for those of our centres that are Next Gen, and we will be providing, as the year goes, some more clarity and depth to the indicative content that's in the components. It's worth noting that the indicative content in the components is that industry wrote at the time of the original incarnation of the qualification. So that's setting out what they think it's important that people moving on to university know and can do. And as I've already alluded to, as we approach the end of the second year, so the completing of the extended diploma, we'll be asking for centres' feedback on the mark sheets, because we feel that there's probably more we can do to provide greater clarity and detail on there without necessarily tying centres up to making the project only go a certain way because of the way that the criteria is written. And that's why we think the standardisation meetings will be helpful. Thanks very much. If you have any questions, then you can contact your external verifier, or you can contact the AIM office and we can try and respond to you. It might not be straight away. We might have to refer your question to one of our specialist staff or associates, but we will get back to you. Thanks very much and good luck.